Welcome to Ancient History 101. I'm your host, Alexandra Sills. Or should I say, welcome back to Ancient History 101, because this is part 2 of our introduction to Augustus, the original Roman emperor. My special guest, Dr. Mike Beer, is back, and having covered Augustus's early life when he was still Octavian, part 2 is going to cover Augustus the emperor. We're going to talk about his private life, his very messy private life, and how he kind of sounds like the father from hell. And we're going to talk more about how he transformed Rome forever. So, without further ado, let's get back into the conversation. So, in the last episode, we were talking about Augustus's rise to power and what he did to change Rome and its fabric and its culture. But now I want to get into the messiness of his private life. So, we briefly mentioned wives in the first half of this episode. Can we talk about his wives in a bit more detail, please?
Okay, so we mentioned Scribonia, his second wife, who provided him with his only natural child, Julia. But then he marries for the third time, and this is the wife that I think many people will know, which is Livia. Now, Livia comes from a very noble and long-lived family, the Claudians. She is already married to somebody else at the point that Octavian will meet her. So Octavian is married to Scribonia. Livia is married to somebody else. And this is where the moral high ground that Augustus will come to occupy will fall down a lot.
Right.
On the day that his daughter is delivered, he divorces his wife, Scribonia. Not great.
Yeah, the timing is...
Yeah. Then he goes on to demand that Livia's husband divorce Livia, and so he can marry her. Livia is pregnant at that point, not with Augustus's child, but with her husband's child. So that's the way they get together. Yeah, it's all the stuff later on where Augustus portrays himself as a very moral person, and all the attacks that he made on Antony. Yeah, it's a lot of hypocrisy because his own personal life is turbulent, shall we say. So he marries Livia, and therefore he brings on board her two sons, and they will be Drusus and Tiberius. So the Augustus family will be Julia, his daughter, and Drusus and Tiberius. Unfortunately, as time goes on, we're going to get a bit of a rift going on. Certainly, if you believe, Robert Graves and the Claudius novels, and ever
Yes.
seen I, Claudius, you will certainly know the reputation that Livia has, where she ends up supposedly bumping off nearly all of the family to make sure that Tiberius becomes the heir. But I can talk you through how all that plays out.
So what age was he when he married Livia, roughly?
He is, I'm going to say that he's probably in his mid-20s.
So still quite young. Third wife.
Yes, that's quite normal for Romans. Mark Antony ended up having 5 wives. These are all political marriages, so a lot of the betrothals happen when people are very young, and very often they are not even consummated. They are just simply alliances that you can have with important families.
Right.
Aristocratic Romans do marry several times, and it's not regarded as being somebody who fails in their marriages frequently. It's just simply that's what you do.
So it is something that you do, but perhaps divorcing your wife on the same day as she's given birth still perhaps raises a couple of eyebrows, right?
It would do, but then we do have to remember about who knows these things. The scandals, and there are lots of scandals coming up, I think, these are restricted to a fairly close circle, not in the sense that they're being hidden. It's just the fact that ordinary people don't have access to this information.
Right.
I'm sure that they don't know who most of these people are. There's no kind of media in any sense. So emperors, as they will become, or even senior politicians, they're just not known by the public. So when we talk about scandals to come and we think this is going to rock, the world of Augustus and bring him down, no, it won't, because the only people who would know about these are, the elite, essentially.
Right, okay. So it's a kind of guarded secret between the upper crust.
I think so, yes.
Right. So he's divorced Scribonia, but
Yep.
he had a child with her.
Yes.
Livia has got 2 children by her
Yes.
previous husband. Do they have any biological children of their own together?
No, they don't have any children together at all. What eventually will happen, after a long time, is that Augustus will adopt Livia's children. But this takes a while for it to happen because Augustus will prefer to try and seek an heir from his own biological child, Julia. So it will be Julia that will be married off to various people to try and provide heirs. And we mentioned that Julia gets married to Agrippa and they will have 5 children together. And it's 2 of those children that Augustus will push for initial heirs, and that's Gaius and Lucius Caesar.
Okay, those names don't crop up very often. Can we assume that their careers were quite short?
Yes, they don't live that long. Gaius dies in 4 AD and Lucius dies 2 years before that in 2 AD. So we're talking about late teens. They are people very, very much at the beginning of their careers. So they both die in sort of the early stages of their army careers. I'd imagine that these are people that are not that well known. When Marcellus dies in 23, he's only 19, I think. So you've got to remember that the life expectancy in the Roman world is lower than ours. The fact that Augustus gets to be 76 is unusual because many people would struggle to get beyond their 30s. So Gaius and Lucius will end up not getting that far. Okay, so Agrippa himself will die in 13 BC, so 12 BC, I think, actually. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about Julia, the only child of Augustus biologically. Is that a close relationship? Do they really seem to love each other? What's her life like?
Well, if they did love each other, then it very, very, very definitely ended in a hate relationship. She is somebody, I think, that has a really raw deal certainly in the historical sources. She is essentially used as someone who's been married off to create male heirs. When Agrippa dies, she is then handed over to Tiberius to be married to him. They don't like each other at all. It's a very, very miserable marriage by all accounts. And what happens to Julia eventually is just appalling. She is accused, and we don't know whether or not this is machinations by Livia or whether it's true. She is accused of mass adulteries with senior aristocrats. This is seen as intolerable to Augustus because he's passed a series of moral laws telling people how to behave in bed and how they should get married. And she's basically now got a reputation for going against all these laws. He sees that as humiliating. And in 2 BC, he banishes her to a very little island off the coast of what is now modern-day Tuscany. And she stays there almost for the rest of her life, to be followed actually by her own daughter, Julia the Younger, who's accused of something similar. It's horrible. I mean, anybody who's seen I, Claudius will remember the sort of the scenes where Augustus is asking, is anybody here who hasn't slept with my daughter? Yeah, she is just absolutely out of the family by that stage. Okay. Absolutely. We don't know. I mean, there's an awful lot of misogyny, obviously, in the Roman world. We could go down the route that Livia is taking out that side of the family to make sure that Tiberius or Drusus gets into power. But it's entirely possible that Julia was just a very, very unhappy woman who was just seeking happiness outside the arranged marriages that, she was having to go through. She produced 5 children with Agrippa, literally, over about sort of 8 years, I think. So it's
Yeah.
you can't blame her for just wanting to be a bit happy. The framing of it as multiple adulteries might be masking the fact that some of them were very important people and that maybe Augustus saw them as threats, political threats. So the possibility of plots, possibly.
Hmm.
It's not just a moral thing in that case. It's to do with, Augustus possibly thinking that there was a coup going to be taken up against him.
Okay. So for her, I mean, she's married off to her dad's best mate. Then when he dies, she's married off to her stepbrother,
Yeah.
essentially to be a baby making machine. She doesn't get any choice in this, I'm assuming.
I wouldn't imagine so. Women don't have any choice about who they marry. These are all arranged marriages.
Okay.
To be fair, quite a lot of the men don't have that much choice either because it's decided by parents. So if you're a Roman aristocrat, you are told who to marry. So to put a little bit of context for the Julia and Tiberius relationship, Tiberius is already married to somebody, and this is where it gets slightly complicated. He's married to one of Agrippa's daughters, not one
Good
by
grief.
Julia. He is told, Vipsania, he is told by Augustus, you must divorce Vipsania and marry Julia. And Tiberius says, I don't want to. I don't want to divorce my wife. And Augustus will say, you've got no choice. He has to marry Julia. They don't have any children, and the marriage apparently is very, very unhappy.
Okay, so we see him making decisions on behalf of both his children, not just the girls. He is making decisions for the boys, even though they are saying to him, we don't want this.
A Roman father can do that. A Roman father theoretically has absolute power over his children. He can have them killed, theoretically, in Roman law. I don't think that happens very often, but he's allowed to do that. So he, as the pater familias, the father figure, he can do that. And he would also then reinforce that by saying this is to do with dynastic reasons. This is a really important thing. This is not just your happiness. You're doing this to produce heirs for the future.
Okay, so he's definitely looking forward rather than what's right in front of him. Let's talk about Tiberius.
Yeah.
So it's an adopted son,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't sound like he was the first choice to take over. We know that it is Tiberius who ends up taking over. So what kind of relationship is that?
Up and down, it's fair to say. Tiberius is a very, very experienced general. He's one of the people that achieves quite a lot of the victories that we would associate with Augustus. If anybody's familiar with the statue called the Prima Porta statue, the famous statue of Augustus where he's sort of raising his arm and he's got what looks like a cloak hanging over one arm. You can see it in the Vatican.
Okay.
That is, we think, dated to about 20 BC. And on the front of Augustus's armor is an image of the king of the Parthians handing over the legionary standards that were lost at the Battle of Carrhae in 53 BC, the Roman defeat
Okay.
then, to a Roman general that we think might be Tiberius. So Tiberius is a very capable commander. Sources seem to indicate that he's quite a sort of a cold, distant man, but again, we're not entirely sure about that. But yes, he's really, really miffed quite a lot of the time that Augustus is clearly just going through the other side of the family. Tiberius feels that he's always been very loyal. He's been very capable. He's seen Agrippa preferred first of all. Then he's seen Gaius and Lucius. And even then, after Gaius and Lucius, there is another son called Agrippa Posthumus, who's also then adopted. Tiberius is thinking, when is it going to get to me? Agrippa Posthumus will get banished eventually. So it's Tiberius's turn. I think even at some stage that Augustus was preferring Tiberius's younger brother Drusus as being a bit more of a candidate. So, and then finally, when he adopts Tiberius as his successor, as his stepson, or as a proper son, I should say, he also then says, but I want you at the same time, I want you to adopt your nephew, okay, your nephew, the son of your brother, Drusus, called Germanicus. Germanicus is another famous Roman general. And Tiberius is thinking, but I've already got my son of my own already. What Augustus is essentially saying to Tiberius is, I'm adopting you. You might be the next heir, but I think possibly I would prefer your nephew to be the actual heir. So you make sure you adopt him instead. So,
Is this because at the time Germanicus is too young to be adopted himself by Augustus?
Yes. Also, as well, Germanicus is a rapidly rising person up the ranks. He's a bit of a star. He's the guy that will end up sorting the problems out when there's a big rebellion in Germany in the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD, where three legions get massacred. Augustus is, distraught at this, and he sends Germanicus out to sort the problem out. So, yeah, I think with Tiberius, we can see in the sources that every so often he will flounce off. So he basically takes himself off to Rhodes, the island of Rhodes, for quite a long time when he feels that Agrippa is being preferred to him. And it's only when Agrippa dies that Augustus said, right, you got to come back. And he's very reluctant to do that. So you can understand why Tiberius would be really resentful. He is clearly seen as like fifth or sixth choice. It's not a vote of confidence, is it?
When he's finally first choice, it sounds like it's only because a placeholder until Germanicus is ready, right? That's harsh.
It is. And to be fair, we combine that with the stories that come to us from Suetonius, and Suetonius really doesn't give him a very good press at all, as same with Tacitus. So we sort of look back and we always imagine that the emperor that he might become is down to the fact that he's, resentful. He's got a really bitter kind of grudge against Augustus, and that forms the way that he is as an emperor later on.
So Augustus is showing himself as a kind of first citizen. He's pushing morality laws. But from what we've learned about his marriages and how they happened and ended, how he treats his children, it sounds like his private life was actually really quite messy.
It was. One of the sources, I think it's Suetonius, says that that his wife Livia used to go off finding young women for him to have sex with, which is
Wow.
quite a serious accusation to make. He's got a reputation as a massive womanizer. And that goes all the way back to when he was a triumvir. This is something that Mark Antony will throw at him. He's saying, well, you're having to go at me about Cleopatra. How many women do you regularly sleep with? So please don't kind of get all preachy with me. I think what we do tend to find with Augustus is one of the reasons I really like studying him is that he's the consummate politician, that the stuff that he says, the stuff that he does publicly is so much at odds with what he does privately. So he pitches himself as a very, very religious man. There's lots of images you see of Augustus with his head covered, which shows that he's being a priest. You look at him on the side of the Areopagus, he is restoring temples, he's building temples. And yet you do sort of think, I bet you he's probably not that religious, because he knows being religious goes down well with his voter base, that there's an awful lot of people who like the idea of somebody who's very conservative socially and religiously. And that's what he pitches. And it works because he goes from being this triumvir. As a triumvir, he's quite a nasty piece of work. He's very ambitious. He's very ruthless. He changes his name and then he reinvents himself, and he becomes this sort of slightly crusty, old-fashioned, socially conservative, religious figure, certainly to the public. And you sort of think, well, how much of that is true? I suspect a lot of it isn't. And that's probably what makes Augustus the success that he was, because he manages his public image so well.
So he's not just rebooting Rome, he's rebooting his own reputation at the same time.
Oh, absolutely. The stories that you see in later sources about him being a triumvir show him as being particularly nasty. So there are stories that say that he bumped off two of the consuls in 43, that supposedly they died on the battlefield, but some people have suggested that he had them killed so that he could become consul. There are stories about him torturing people, plucking out their eyes, all these sorts of things. But of course, with a name change, you can reinvent yourself. And that's exactly what he does. So after that, nobody thinks about him as being this ruthless, aggressive person who, in fact, perpetrates some civil wars. He is this kindly father figure who's got a big family, likes going to the temples, is all about peace and prosperity. That's the new image, and the old Octavian is forgotten.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because when you look at instances in him in, for instance, modern works of fiction, I'm thinking particularly HBO's Rome,
Oh, yes.
which doesn't go up to him being an emperor. It shows him in his youth. The kind of image that show has is of him being a quiet, socially awkward genius who is almost reluctant to take power, and everyone around him behaves really badly.
But as you get to the end of that series, you do get the sense that he's like a chess player. He's moving people around. And that's the other interesting about Augustus, is that people find him hard to warm to because he's quite cold. Mark Antony is this very passionate, larger-than-life figure.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of flaws, obviously. But when they see Augustus, they sort of see this person as kind of so calculating, so ruthless in terms of, and so false in many ways.
Yeah.
So I think that's why he's probably not as immediately an attractive character to engage with, but obviously politically incredibly astute.
It's interesting. I mean, in that show, they almost show him is almost sociopathic in that he doesn't really understand. He doesn't seem to understand emotions as much as he does tactics.
I like that because he does manipulate people. He manipulates his own family quite ruthlessly to get what he wants. They are just pawns. Does that make him a good ruler? Possibly. I mean, later on, you're going to get lots of emperors that are more volatile, shall we say, the Caligulas and the Neros, and the Domitians. Augustus, at least, I suppose, is reining in that kind of excess, but he is nonetheless as ruthless as we will see later emperors, I think.
So I've mentioned the HBO show, which, I mean, is already getting quite old, isn't it? But is there an adaptation, a novel, a show, a movie that you think really seems to have nailed his personality and his vibe?
I would definitely agree with you with HBO. It's almost 20 years old now, I think.
Yeah.
It's still almost the go-to. I would say I, Claudius, a little stagey now, but actually in terms of how close it is to the history, it's very close, and that's adapted from Robert Graves' novels. One that I saw a few years ago, I've only seen the first series, not the second series, is called Domina, which is all about Livia. And I really liked the first series. I thought that was really interesting, and that definitely pushed the angle that she was very, very politically astute, and that, in fact, that it was more of a partnership than perhaps some of the other sources. And I liked that. I liked the idea that, that he was being not much advised, but was having good dialogues and exchanges of ideas about policy with Livia. That sort of fits in quite well with when we find later on with emperors that, there are women in the imperial family that are incredibly intelligent, politically astute, people like Messalina with, Claudius, and then we have Agrippina with Nero. Two women that get absolutely slated and put through the mill by historians, but I would imagine that happens to them simply because they are too powerful and too clever. So definitely Domina. So that was, I think, Sky. I'm trying to think if there are any other ones at the moment, not that I can think of off the top of my head.
So we've touched on Livia there. What can we tell about their kind of marriage? I've obviously got the impression that she didn't like her stepdaughter very much. But what kind of impact on his rule did Livia have?
Well, Livia is going to be somebody that will outlive Augustus and will go on to be quite a strong presence in the life of Tiberius. In the early reign of Tiberius, she is officially deified eventually. There's no doubt that that there was a strong bond between them. They are married for, I'm going to say, 40-something years. They don't have any children together, so clearly the bond isn't just to do with producing heirs. She, depending on who you read, that she is this sort of serial killer type figure that's picking off, poisoning everybody in the family that's not Tiberius. I do like the interpretation that Domina gave, which is that she comes from a very, very influential and powerful family, and that Octavian, when he marries her initially, is trying to forge connections with this powerful family. So I think that coming from the background that she does, she's definitely not this sort of the submissive, humble Matrona that the propaganda puts out about her being this kind of submissive wife. She's very clever. She's very astute. I like to think that she was advising him about a lot of things. And that's certainly how, when you see something like I, Claudius, presents her as being the person actually who is the power behind the throne. And I think that's possibly a way that we can see, what the dynamics are within that family. That, yes, Augustus is clever, but undoubtedly Livia was also a powerful figure.
So Augustus's daughter is the baby-making machine, but his wife he can respect for having intellect and worth beyond what her uterus can produce.
The fact that they don't have children together means that, yes, there might have been love, but I think it's also the fact that she's just a very, very powerful ally to have, somebody that he can rely on. Though ultimately, if you go down the Robert Graves route, she kills him. Supposedly, this is the idea that Robert Graves says that Livia, ends up poisoning her own husband because he's going to change his will.
So is that something we see in ancient sources, or is that just something in modern adaptations to make everything a bit juicy?
It's coming from Tacitus. Tacitus is
Right.
hinting that Livia, he sort of says that somebody dies, and he sort of says maybe Livia had a hand in it. And from that, Robert Graves has said, well, essentially, Livia is just killing people. So she poisons people. We're told that maybe she poisoned Drusus, her own son, because Drusus at some point said, I think we should have the Republic back. Sealed his fate. I don't know. I mean, it's a nice idea, but it does really, really smack of misogyny. And you've just got to think that actually in the ancient world, people dying young isn't that unusual, especially if you're a soldier. It's going to happen. But yeah, the people who like to see the conspiracies do like the idea of saying, well, all these people dying, is it credible? Well, yes, it probably is credible, but it's an interesting one. Scholars still debate it. So it's a line or two in Tacitus. It's not really expanded upon, but Graves goes with it full on.
So we're moving on to the end of his life, hinting that he might have been murdered. What do we know for sure about this period of his life as he's getting older?
As he gets older, he is still being portrayed in all the images that are out there as a 30 or 40-year-old. So he's one of these figures that freezes his public image, the statues, the coins, when he's sort of somewhere between 30 and 40. It's to give the idea that he's a little bit like a god, like Apollo, that he doesn't age. And yet, of course, he does age. He does get ill. He is looking to move on. There are things going on. I talked a little bit earlier on that there's a big rebellion in the Teutoburg Forest in Germany where 3 legions are lost, which is a massive, massive blow to him. It's something that, that is going to have far-reaching effects, because if you get a serious rebellion that succeeds somewhere, the news will get round other provinces and it's likely to weaken them. So if Germany rebels, then think about other places that have been recently conquered, Gaul, Egypt, etc. Will they revolt as well? So that is an issue, but it is dealt with. And the fact that it's dealt with by Germanicus seems to reassure people that because Germanicus has been set up as an heir apparent, then things will be going okay. I mentioned also as well that, Julia the Younger, so one of the granddaughter of Augustus, is also exiled for supposed adultery, and she goes off to join her mother in exile. So there's still family problems, but it looks like Augustus can kind of wind things down a bit. He knows that Tiberius is there, not the first choice. Germanicus is there, probably the first choice. And so as we get further on, we start to see him being more comfortable about mentioning things like civil wars. So there is a document, it's not a document, it's an inscription that appears towards the end of his life. It's called the Res Gestae Divi Augustus, the achievements of Augustus. It's basically his CV. And it was originally placed outside his mausoleum. So there's a big mausoleum of Augustus in Rome. It's always under repair. It might open this year. It wasn't open last time I went a couple of years ago. But it's where all the members of the imperial family up to, I'm going to say about 98, 99 AD are buried. And it lists all the achievements of Augustus. So it's a very, very upbeat document, and it lists all the laws that were passed and all the provinces that were annexed and all the temples that were built or rebuilt. It lists all the offices that Augustus was awarded. It lists all the money that Augustus spent on various big projects. It gives all his achievements, essentially. And it actually is quite comfortable in talking about civil wars at that point. So he doesn't feel he's got to disguise it anymore, because he's gone on for so long that nobody is thinking, oh, he did civil wars, we better get rid of him. He's been such a feature of the Roman world for so long. A little like, I'm going to give two examples, a little like, I've mentioned Louis XIV before. We could also say Queen Victoria, and we could also say Elizabeth II. If you have a ruler that goes on for so long, there'll be large numbers of people alive that only remember that ruler. They will have no memory of what came before. So the longer a king, queen rules, the more you don't remember what went on before. So for Augustus, the fact that he's been in sole charge from pretty much 30 BC and he dies in 14 AD, for the ancient world, that's a really long time. That's 44 years. There are hardly any people who remember the Republic. So therefore, when Tiberius gets named as the next ruler, nobody turns around and says, you can't do that. We don't do that. They don't remember what it was like before. As far as they're concerned, every time that there was some kind of change of ruler beforehand, every time there was a consul, there'd always be lots and lots of problems. There'd be riots, there'd be wars and stuff. There's been no civil strife for 44 years. Therefore, they're saying this system must be okay.
Yeah, and that perhaps wouldn't have been the assumption that they would have made if he died 5 years after Actium, right?
Oh, almost certainly. I think if he died 5 years after Actium, then it would have definitely either gone back to a republic or you just have another person trying to take over. But the very fact that he is such a feature of Roman life for so long, people are so used to the idea of having this one person. And they also think as well, what if Augustus has named somebody as an heir? It must be okay. We trust his judgment. So it's longevity essentially that really helps. I think. I mean, he does things that are really great. He does things that are not so great. He has successes. He has a few failures. But it's the very fact that you can go that long and not have major disruption over that time internally. Largely things are successful. Largely there are, no real disasters. I mean, all you could have, if you decided maybe that, at some point there would have been weak points, like if we had earthquakes, if we had a big disaster, if we had a plague, that would have changed things, I think, immensely. But the fact is that there are no major problems. There are no big wars. There are no big natural disasters. There are no economic failures. There are no big crop failures. It's a period of relative stability. It's not quite the golden age that Augustus says it is, but it does mean that by the end of that era, nobody ever afterwards seriously says, let's go back to the Republic. Ever.
Wow.
And you get shocking emperors. You get absolutely shocking emperors.
Real shockers.
And nobody says after Caligula or Nero or Domitian or Commodus, they don't go, oh, it's not working. They just simply go, oh, the system is generally fine. We just need to find somebody who's more like Augustus.
Right.
And we do have to remember as well that after this period, the titles Caesar and Augustus get incorporated into the titles of all the other emperors.
So that's some impact then.
Well, it's probably the biggest impact that he has, actually, that every emperor afterwards, if it's a good emperor, then they will be compared favorably to Augustus. If it's a bad emperor, they will say, we just need to go back and be more like Augustus.
So after he's the last one left standing until his death, he's in charge for an awfully long time, which you've mentioned is, perhaps unexpected considering that you mentioned he's weak and ill all the time.
He is.
No major invasions, no major natural disasters. So actually, it sounds like, yes, it was what he was doing insofar as building an image, making sure that he's giving Rome monuments and beautification, making life generally better for the people living in it. But it also sounds like he just was a bit lucky.
It is luck. It's like any rule in that nowadays. Is that you become a government, and you think, well, am I going to be inheriting something awful? I mean, we've had governments recently, where we've had things like COVID, for instance, massively unpredictable. The
Mhm.
government had to sort of deal with that. You have to kind of think on your feet and develop new strategies. There are points in the Roman world where there are huge problems. So poor old Marcus Aurelius, for instance, has things like outbreaks of plague and then massive problems in Germany. And he's stuck out there for ages. All it takes is one big rebellion somewhere or a big economic failure. And then that's it. But Augustus, as you say, happened to be quite lucky in the sense that he just happened to be around when there was nothing major going on. And compared to what had come before, people saw that as this kind of, golden age of prosperity and peace.
I'm imagining that they will have kind of connected it and thought it isn't luck, it's because he's so wonderful that the universe has kind of righted itself, right?
Well, and the fact is as well is that one of the first things that Tiberius does is he makes Augustus into a god. Part of the
Yeah.
reason, of course, is so that Tiberius can do what Augustus did with Julius Caesar, which is say, I'm a son of a god. But it just puts this kind of sheen onto the whole Augustan era. It's like, we had this great emperor, he kind of kickstarted it all, and then we've made him a god. And so that whole era now takes on this kind of romantic glow, and everybody looks back and goes, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, we were like that? And it's why they put up with so many awful members of the Julio-Claudian family. You would have thought that, after Caligula, they'd be thinking, no, but no, they think that he's got sort of magic genetics, that if you're connected to Augustus, then you must be brilliant. And then you just
Yeah.
think, but you're not, because you get Nero eventually, and that doesn't go well either. But
No.
he has got the magic. He has got this kind of magic touch where people just think, he's almost the archetype. He's the archetype of what is a good emperor. Everybody in some way tries to be like Augustus.
Is he someone that we should be admiring for what he did, or should we maybe take a balanced approach and take certain things that we don't like from his career and his personality? And, we don't want to idealize him, right?
Well, some people would say that he destroyed the Republic. So if you're a fan of the Roman Republic, then that's clearly a bad thing. But those people who study the Roman Republic will say it was in an awful mess anyway. So something had to be done with it. Other people will say that, he started this glorious period of the Roman world, the what bit that everybody really knows, the famous thing, the famous things like, the Colosseum and, the great emperors like Hadrian, etc. All that is part of this period that Augustus kickstarts. But of course, ultimately, we're talking about emperors. We're talking about the legacy of that will be, empires in the future. And empires obviously can be rather toxic. If we think to somebody like Mussolini clearly takes Augustus as a massive, massive influence. If you study the
Mhm.
period of fascism, he's always talking about how Augustus is his sort of role model. It really does depend on what your thoughts are about, what the Roman Empire will end up doing, whether you feel it's a force for good or whether you feel it's the template for awful things that come afterwards. It's him that starts it off. He took Rome in a certain direction. After the Republic fails, there are other ways they could have gone. The way he took it was through autocracy. And, it was a path that many other civilizations have followed as well, looking at the Roman model.
So it's fair to say then that there are a diverse group of people who will always be able to find something to admire about him, right? And there are also people with maybe less honourable intentions that will be finding things that they can admire about him as well.
He's a divisive figure. He's an ambiguous figure. So I think, as we've talked about, that there seems to be a discrepancy between the private person and the role, the image that he portrays for the rest of the world. And I think, yeah, you can sort of see lots of different things in Augustus, and I think he'd be quite happy with that, because I think he likes the idea of being a bit ambiguous. People have suggested that, that he portrays a different face to different people. So he'll be like this to one group of people. He'll be something different to another group of people. The consummate politician, in a sense. And
Right.
that's another piece of legacy that he has, is that, many politicians will look to the way that Augustus was and say, yes, it's all about image making. It's all about, doing one thing, thinking another thing, having this public and private persona and manipulating image to get what you want.
I think I think I'm fair in saying this, one of his most vocal number one fans at the moment seems to be Mark Zuckerberg. So
Yes, yes.
would
Uh,
it be fair
I
to
get the-
say then that if you hear someone in modern society saying that they're a huge fan and admirer of Augustus, you should maybe ask some questions. What is it that you admire about Augustus before, we continue the conversation?
well, yes, there's another other fans of Augustus spring to mind. Boris Johnson was a big fan of Augustus.
Oh, yeah.
And also as well, Augustus is often associated with the imagery of sort of far right Italian football fan movements.
Wow.
Seen that sort of thing. So that, again, that's very much linked to the Mussolini connection. But yes, he's not, as far as I know, he's not been sort of adopted by too many far right groups. But yes, the Boris Johnson was quite a vocal person about Augustus and about the qualities of leadership that Augustus had. So you can draw your own conclusions about
Oh, yeah.
whether there are any other aspects of Augustus's life that Boris Johnson feels that he could identify with.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, if Augustus has a different face for every occasion, it's fair to say that people of all different kinds of political ideologies will find things to like, things to maybe not like as much.
Yes, I think that's fair to say, and I think that's why it makes him such an interesting person to study. Because some cases he's unknowable, because how do you differentiate between what he's putting out there to the public and what he's really doing?
Let's talk about sources then, because we want to talk about the sources that are written as close to his lifetime as possible. Do we have a full set of sources? Are they reliable?
Right, not a full set of sources, and some of them exist in a lesser form than others. So if we go through what's around at the time, the stuff that's at the time is largely we have to treat with a great deal of caution. It's the literary stuff. It's the poetry,
Right.
um, which is mostly praising Augustus. Well, it's all praising Augustus, depending on how you look at Virgil's Aeneid, which some people have said is a bit more nuanced. It's all very pro Augustus. And again, we have to just be careful with that. The Res Gestae, the autobiography of Augustus, is produced by Augustus. So it is his own words. But of course, it doesn't mention any of the problems. He doesn't mention any defeats. He doesn't mention the family problems at all. It's
Uh-huh.
all relentlessly upbeat. It's a CV that doesn't necessarily lie because it's a public document, but it omits things. So,
Right.
you know what it's like, when we all do CVs, we're all presenting one part of our personality, and it's the successful part. There is a historian that comes on in Tiberius's reign called Velius Particulus, but he's relentlessly pro-Tiberius, so anything that he tends to say about Augustus should be seen in that light. Then
Right.
we have quite a big gap. We have a big gap, and the next sources we've got are 2nd century AD. So the main ones that people will look for will be Suetonius, Suetonius's biographies of the Julio-Claudians. We have Tacitus, but Tacitus is largely missing the Augustus material.
Right.
We have some of his other stuff about the Julio-Claudians, not complimentary. And essentially, Tacitus blames Augustus for giving the world to Tiberius and Nero.
Okay.
And then a century on after that, we have Cassius Dio, who's got quite a lot to say about Augustus, but it's 200 years afterwards. And all of these later sources seem to be filtering their view of Augustus through subsequent emperors.
Right.
So, for example, Tacitus really, really doesn't like the Julio-Claudians because essentially he blames the Julio-Claudians for putting a system in place that gave the world Domitian. And Domitian is somebody that basically was very, very unpleasant to the Senate, and Tacitus doesn't like that.
Right.
So the later sources are quite far away. And so for somebody like Augustus, who's essentially been turned into a god, it's difficult to know how accurate these things are. But clearly, if they're writing outright lies, then it might be fairly easy to check that. Suetonius has got quite good resources. Up to a certain point, he was working for the Emperor Hadrian, and he was in charge of the sort of the library and the archives. So he's got access to quite a lot of information.
Right.
So we don't tend to think of Suetonius as being, massively unreliable. He is very gossipy, and he does like scandal. So he does tend to pick out the stuff that, the interesting stuff.
Yeah.
But from the time we've got very little. So everything is generally speaking about 100 years at least afterwards. And that for any kind of source has its pluses and minuses. You've got, not so many eyewitness accounts, but you have got hindsight. And that's something that's interesting, that Suetonius and Tacitus know what's coming. So they can kind of trace the influence. They can kind of see how he fits in. Depending on whether you like the imperial system, you're going to think Augustus is wonderful. If you think, oh, there's awful emperors, then it's not great. But yeah, we don't really have much from the time. I think that's more an accident rather than Augustus clamping down and not allowing, free speech. Suetonius has mixed things to say about that. He seems to say that Augustus is slightly paranoid and he does sort of have a go at people for writing bad stuff, but sometimes he's quite relaxed about it and he allows people to make jokes about him. So we don't really know whether or not Augustus is going around seizing, independent historians. But on the whole, we do know a reasonable amount about him. We've got, and we've also, of course, of his early life, we've got Cicero, very early life. So Cicero is one of our main sources for the late Republic. Now, there's not a huge crossover because Cicero ends up being killed in 43, about the time that Octavian comes on the scene. And it is, of course, largely Octavian's fault that Cicero gets killed, because it's Octavian that suggests that Mark Antony prescribe him. So we've got a couple of mentions of Octavian by Cicero. It's not a huge amount, but it's that end that we've got, the sort of the early life that we can see a little bit about him.
I mean, Cicero is a really interesting source as well, because a lot of it is coming from his letters to his friends. So it's not intended for a public audience necessarily. So, and it is someone that he's met in person. So that's fairly reliable.
Yes, I'm going to say yes for the letters. If we get sort of speeches, then clearly much of it is for effect. But we think for the letters, certainly to close friends, then they're going to be candid. And we do know that Cicero was trying to manipulate Octavian into kind of taking Mark Antony out, and it all backfires. So, unfortunately for Cicero. So for our sources, I would say that we've got a number, and they don't tend to massively contradict each other either. So
always handy.
Either they're working from the same sources, or they're all plagiarizing one source that's wrong. If it's always possible. Nobody has come out and said that there are major problems with knowing about Augustus, the main things that he does.
Sure. Are there any misconceptions about Augustus that we can say categorically right now, what you've heard is not true?
Oh, that's a good question. I not so much a misconception, but I do genuinely think that because Augustus manages his image so carefully, that people, when you say Augustus and you sort of picture who he is, they have this image of him in his 30s, the statue imagery, the imagery on the coins. And it's the reality. It's this kind of very, very ill, pasty person who goes on to be 76 and yet is still producing images of himself in his 30s. I think that's the misconception. They always imagine that Augustus looks like that through his whole life. And it's not. It's just basically he's just banned anybody from producing images that don't show him like that. It's a really, I mean, I suppose the analogy that I would make is that maybe celebrities that don't like being photographed as they get older,
Yeah,
photoshopping is probably a way of thinking. That's the main misconception, is that he he is somebody that is eternally youthful. He's vigorous. He's handsome, and he's eternally young. And yet, in reality, that he's very ill. He's arthritic. He's prone to all kinds of gastrointestinal disorders. He's just not like his public image at all.
right. And I'm guessing that we don't have any image of him that would be more authentic.
Not that I'm aware of. I don't, from what I know, that he would have absolutely forbidden that.
Yeah.
You notice if you see all the images of Augustus, even the sort of slightly cheap knockoff copies that turn up in the provinces, they're all identifiably him because they all have exactly the same hairline. That's how you identify Augustus, is his hairline. That only falls apart really when you realise that they use Augustus's image often if they want to represent other members of the Julio-Claudian family, because they all associate Augustus with success, so they all start looking like him. So very often you'll get a statue that turns up and they'll say, "Who's this? Is it Germanicus? Is it Gaius? Is it Lucius? Is it Tiberius? Or is it Augustus?" But yeah, he's somebody that looks the same, and he looks, yeah, in his 30s. The Prima Porta statue is the sort of the archetype image of Augustus. And yet Suetonius says that he's got bad teeth, and he's got his hair's falling out and all that sort of stuff. He's really small. He's really small. And yet the Prima Porta statue is slightly larger than life size.
Of
If you
course.
see it, it's it's like almost 2 meters.
It's
Which,
worth mentioning as well, if you can't make it all the way to Rome to see that statue, you can see an excellent replica in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford.
yes, and I get a funny feeling as well that there's probably one in the Cambridge Museum that they have where they have all the
Oh, yeah, I
replicas
think
and
there
stuff.
is, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's there as well. I'm fairly certain. And Google it, of course,
Hmm.
because you can examine it in great detail. But that image of Augustus, this almost godlike figure, is so not like the reality at all.
But it worked
Oh,
because that's how we
absolutely.
picture him today.
And they all the other emperors go on, well, apart from Nero, he seems to be the odd one out. He's quite happy showing himself in all kinds of unflattering poses. But all the other emperors that come along, they all essentially adopt the "I look like a god" image. So even somebody like Claudius, who we know is got quite a lot of physical ailments, he ends up looking really buff and like a sort of an Avenger. And that's come from Augustus. That's the way you do it. Show that you are like a god, and people will fall for it.
I mean, you kind of answered my next question already, but I'm going to ask it anyway in case there's anything else. What's the huge impact that we see him make on history, not just in Rome but beyond?
I think more than anyone else, and there have been empire builders before him, he is the person that legitimizes the idea of empire. The people that come after him will essentially be using him as the kind of template for what they want to do. Good people and bad people. So whether it's Charlemagne or Napoleon or Hitler, in some sense, they're all looking back to the Roman Empire, and the Roman
Right.
Empire starts with him. Um, some people have argued that Julius Caesar is somebody who is also a role model, but Julius Caesar is the sort of the faltering first steps of what will become the Roman Empire. Augustus learns from that mistake, and he's the one that starts the idea of the cult of the ruler, the person who rules not just by the laws that they have, but by personal charisma.
So he's not just copying Julius Caesar, he's correcting Julius Caesar, right?
Absolutely. He looks to Julius Caesar and says, actually, those things that he did were good, but those are the things that I can't do. I can't be a dictator. I can't look like a king. But essentially, Julius Caesar had the right idea in terms of one-person rule. So, yes, that's exactly what he was doing.
So right idea, correcting the methodology. And I think,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's a huge impact to have. I know that obviously Augustus takes a huge space on bookshelves and in documentaries, etc. But I think it's because he kind of deserves it. He has had that massive impact. We can't really get away with not talking about him.
He's the one that, if you're ever going to study classics, or certainly the Roman world, you might end up doing Nero, you might do Hadrian, you might do Constantine, but you've got to have Augustus in there somewhere. Definitely.
Well, thank you for being the person to bring us, Augustus, to the podcast. It's been fantastic talking to you about Augustus. Thank you so much for lending us your expertise.
Thank you very much. I very much enjoyed it.
I'm not going to lie, I was hesitant to dedicate 2 whole episodes to Augustus. I was thinking to myself, do we really need to keep talking about this great man? But I'm so glad that I did, because Mike has demonstrated why it's so important to reevaluate these men who have had such an impact on history, to critically think about them, instead of just idolising them and idealising them. And I'm willing to bet that if you came into these episodes with an idea of who Augustus was already, that maybe now you have an idea that the image that you have is probably one that he created for you, because it sounds like Augustus was the ultimate political chameleon. And whether you love or hate him, you have to give him credit for creating this multifaceted image that has endured until today. He's the ultimate politician, the king of spin. And I love what Mike said, that if we want to understand the Roman Empire and every emperor who came after Augustus, we have to get to grips with Augustus first. I really hope you enjoyed this conversation. I sure did. And if you want to know more about Augustus, or Mike, head to the episode webpage. We've linked it in the episode description below. Ancient History 101 is hosted and produced by me, Alexandra Sills. We are a proud member of the Mnemosyne Memory Collective, a group of podcasters, educators and creators, all dedicated to making learning about the ancient world as inclusive and accessible as possible. Learn more about our podcast and the collective by clicking the links below. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please let us know. We love to hear from you. And make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. We have episodes every single Wednesday, and we have another wonderful episode for you next week. I cannot wait for you to hear it. See you then.